We are starting. So thank you all. And wow, I needed that song. More on that video to come later. I'm Andrew Clark. I'm moderating today's event. And I know there's some people that are still entering the room. I'd like to just remind folks that for those that aren't on the panel, if you could just mute yourself and turn off your video until we get to the Q&A section towards 1 o'clock, okay? I welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to some. I'm Andrew Clark, as I mentioned, from the Collaborative on Poverty, Criminal Justice, and Race, and also director of the IMRP here at Central Connecticut State University, and I'll serve as the moderator today. Thank you for taking the time to join us for our 6th One State, One Film event. I know that some folks aren't able to make it, and just so you know, we are recording this and it will be made available. And the Collaborative is a group of a dozen or so organizations and individuals working together at the intersection of poverty, criminal justice, and race. And we try to focus on work that fills the gaps in what lots of other great organizations are doing, and on creating positive change throughout the community here in Connecticut. We use dynamic films and documentaries, and we've been doing so since throughout COVID, that shed light on and bring to the fore thought-provoking conversation at the intersection of poverty, criminal justice, and race to inspire and motivate us to critically explore the status quo here in Connecticut. And we also provide information and connections for those wanting to take action, whether individually or collectively or both. Today, the film we are focusing on is called Breaking the Cycle. And I hope you have had a chance to watch this very powerful film that follows the deputy warden of Halden, Norway's quote unquote most humane prison, as he travels around the US urging for reform and a new approach to corrections. And in particular, he visits Attica in this film. We chose this film because it compels us to rethink punishment in our country. And this is a quote from the film website. Norway's style of prioritizing rehabilitation and normalcy over the fear, misery, and violent prison culture that exists in most of America's prisons. The safety and success of Norway's system serves as a great example to us here in the US and reminds us of what is possible when we recognize that no individual is disposable regardless of their mistakes. This will, of course, mean a cultural shift on how we view rehabilitation in our society in order to move away from a system currently built on retributive versus restorative measures of incarceration. And the topic of prison reform is a crucial one, but it's plagued by baffling bureaucracy. This is another quote. Claims of budgetary restrictions and societal stigma. Breaking the Cycle embraces the exploration of fresh ideas and meaningful change, which is what we are here to do. In a few minutes, I'll introduce our panelists and start the conversation, and we want to hear from you. So we encourage you to use the chat and Q&A throughout the program, and I'll be monitoring that. After the second panel and small group moderated conversations, we will all come back to share suggestions. So how this is going to work is at around 1 o'clock, we'll end this part of the panel, and then I'll ask folks if to raise their hands. If you raise your hands, you'll be sent out into separate breakout groups to have moderated dialogues, and the folks that remain in the room, those that don't raise their hands, will participate and witness a panel on international perspectives relative to children with incarcerated parents. But before we do any of that, I'm going to ask Kelvin Young to lead us in a centering exercise. Kelvin is a member of the Collaborative and is also a sound healer. We're so fortunate to have him and his special talents as part of the Collaborative family. We recognize that these issues can be difficult to talk about and that many people have had traumatic experiences. We find that Kelvin has a great way of helping us to get a good starting point, so we thank Kelvin in advance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelvin before we begin the conversation. Kelvin?
All right, thank you so much, Andrew, for that warm introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Kelvin Young. I'm a certified sound healer. And I'm also the community health worker here at Intercommunity Healthcare in Hartford, Connecticut. But most importantly, my person is in long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs. and I'm also a formerly incarcerated individual. And at this time, I invite you to really take this opportunity just to check in with yourselves and to just notice how you're feeling within your body, noticing any thoughts that may be coming up or arising, and any emotions that you might be feeling during this experience. Because it's so important that we check in with ourselves when we have these important conversations that might be emotional, might be sensitive topics that we're discussing. So it's important that we have that time to check in with ourselves and to simply just be. So at this time, I invite you to get into a comfortable position, whatever that means for you. And I invite you to sit up as straight as possible. And if you're sitting in a chair, have your feet planted on the floor. And we take this opportunity right now to simply just be. And I invite you to close your eyes, or even bring a soft gaze to the floor, whatever feels most comfortable and safe for you. I invite you to do so at this moment as we take this time to check in with ourselves. As we take this time to relieve stress, find inner peace and balance through the transformative powers of sound. I now invite each and every one of you to take a nice deep breath in and a long breath out. We'll do this 2 more times. Take a nice deep breath in and a long breath out. One more time, take a nice deep breath in and a long breath out. And at this time, I invite you to bring your focus, your attention, and your awareness to the sounds you hear in the comfort of your space. And if your mind happens to drift away to, that infamous to-do list, or all those text messages and emails you need to respond back to, or any other responsibilities or stressors we have in our life, I invite you to bring your focus, your attention and awareness back to the sounds. Allow the sounds to be your anchor into the present moment. Allow it to be a gentle reminder to each and every one of us that the only time that we truly have on this journey that we call life is now. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to offer sound healing to each and every one of you. Thank you.
Jeg har truffet mange positive, endringsvillige mennesker, også i etika på ledelsesnivå. Men jeg har også truffet av på en måte gode mennesker som jobber i feil system. Altså, en god kriminalomsorg gir jo kjempegevinster for samfunnet på lang sikt, og det undres meg over at amerikanerne da ikke på en måte tar det perspektivet innover seg, men så, i hvert fall som system, såpass straffeorientert. Da. Det undres jeg over.
We need to change in this country. Find a way to break the cycle. Many of the individuals that are incarcerated will tell you how parents or people that should have a positive effect on their life have a negative effect on their lives, and they end up incarcerated. We got to work on that a little bit. And then we blame a lot on we're sending men out not prepared. But I personally think we give them the tools. We give them the tools in their toolbox. We are by no means the best we can be. You can always improve. But when you send human beings back to the same environment they left, and you put them out there with no job, no real place to live, some of them, they're destined for failure. You know, it's like throwing a fish in a pond that's going to go dry.
Most people think if you create an environment that's pleasant and not punitive, people won't want to leave. That if you would just make a tougher prison, people won't come back. We know that's not true. It's all over the place. The hardest prisons have the highest recidivism rates. What I think we encounter, and maybe it comes down to this, in a class just recently with new officers, I showed a video of Halden Prison. And one of the staff members in the class very earnestly said to me, I get this. I get it. It makes sense. And I think that's a pretty common response I get. On a human common sense level, people go, yeah, okay. But if you were the victim of a really heinous crime, how would you feel about the perpetrator of that crime living in such a luxurious setting? And my response was, well, I'd be pissed off. But what is that when I say I'm pissed off? And the group kind of takes a minute and they go, it's a feeling. It's an emotion. I said, that's right. And we're not the Department of Emotional Responses. We're the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation.
Thank you, Nana, for that. And that's, for those who have seen it, that's the Breaking the Cycle. And that's the film that we're here to reflect on today, a beautiful film. First want to thank Kelvin. I saw a lot of thank yous in the chat, and you know, we've experienced quite the dynamics in media just in the first 10-15 minutes here today, from Pitbull to this last song to Kelvin's sound healing. And I imagine that's how a lot of people are feeling right now, kind of all over the place and not really settled. But it is, we've always found it helpful and very thankful that Kelvin provides that settling time for us to begin these conversations. So I'd like to introduce our panelists this afternoon. And again, remind folks that if you're not on the panel, I just ask that you turn off your video and mute yourself. You can ask questions in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that as well. So I'm going to first start off by introducing John Stark, who's a director and producer. You put together such a beautiful film where you captured the feeling and atmosphere, I believe, of both systems. Just ask, before I ask this question, can we mute Renee? I think she's muted now. Okay, thank you. So the atmosphere you get when you go from cell to cell, when even those last vignettes of the people that were part of the film captured, I believe, like the atmosphere, the feeling that you're portraying. Can you tell me how it was that you felt when you were filming in these facilities, when you're walking into Halden, when you're walking into Attica? Are there different feelings? Are there different experiences in that?
Andrew, thank you firstly for the very kind words. I'm really delighted. It's an honor to be a part of this panel. Thank you, Kelvin, for our moment of peace and calm. That was nice. To answer your question, Andrew, definitely there was a, you know, the differences between different facilities. Well, they're tangible. So when together with my colleague Thomas, we made a couple of documentaries regarding different aspects of criminal justice reform, and through that work we've visited different facilities in different countries. And the first few times, the first visits were, you know, we were quite in awe that, wow, this is quite, you know, heavy stuff and so on. And but once you get, well, not perhaps used to it, that sounds wrong. So don't get in the wrong way. But when we went to Halden for the third time, or when we went to Attica for the fifth day in a row, or fourth day, you kind of get used to the first impressions, and then be, you know, you're able to look past that, and perhaps I could summarize it in such simple words as, especially Attica didn't feel humane at all. It really felt like a slaughterhouse or something. It was really stark and chilly in some way, and you could sort of, in my opinion, you could honestly sense that there was, you know, aggression in the air, so to speak. That's perhaps the best way I can put it. Yeah.
And so when you're filming people, you're right beside them, obviously, and you're visiting these prisons. And I know you've experienced people from Norway, and we saw John, the deputy warden of hallway, coming over to Attica, and the prison correctional officials from Attica indicated, we didn't see it at the end of the film, that they had been to Halden years back, and they were waiting to see what happened. Did you see a benefit in people seeing a different perspective on how they do their jobs and how systems are set up? Did you see kind of tangible reactions to those walking into those different atmospheres?
When filming Breaking the Cycle, this was soon 5 years ago. It's difficult to believe, but so I'm trying to remember the details here. But at Attica especially, and you saw the superintendent Dale Arders in the clip towards the end, explaining that, you know, a fish in a pond that's about to go dry or something. So to be honest, off cam he was willing to be much more understanding and, you know, acknowledging the you know what they are good at at Attica and what they are not that good at. On camera, and you know, you can see him searching for the right words and so on, and we wanted to include that as well, since I think it tells a whole lot, you know, the communication that he lets out throughout his body, you know, tells the story as well. So he didn't have the possibility to speak out that, you know, of the facts that they know that they should reform some of their practices, definitely. So yes, they were interested in hearing, you know, experiences, values, and learning practices from how the Scandinavian and Nordic countries handle these issues. How far are they willing to go? That's difficult to say. I feel like well, this is obviously a much larger discussion, you know, on a societal level, but you need to have a more long-lasting target and a longer goal with political consensus from many parties, which we are used to have here in the Nordic countries, and we're not seeing that in the US. On the contrary, so stuff like that affects everything below, you know, the upper echelons of political life. So it's difficult for a governor of a state or for a superintendent at a special facility or for the DOC in that state. So there are so many things you have to juggle with, and they're not able to do stuff as easily as they perhaps would like to on a facility level.
Right. And you mentioned capturing the thought process, and you know, just even in that last clip, you can see Jean there being so centered and so certain about, you know, his perspective on things, and the gentleman from Attica almost exasperated and questioning and hoping that, you know, things are as he's saying they are. I mean, that's how I reflected on it. And I just, first of all, I want to thank you for participating. I know you're at night in Sweden, and I was able to talk to you. You've been very generous with your time, very generous with the film. I was able to talk to you and Thomas before. You set aside some time, and a fascinating conversation. We're never going to be able to cover all of what we could cover today. I just, you know, was an hour just for us in that conversation. But I know when you said I asked you, you know, about potential change, and this is where I'd like to bring in our other guests too. You said something that was striking, and that was, can we at least agree upon the fact that the current system isn't working? And I know from what we've explored with Norway, and we have Elin Schie from one of the Norwegian prisons. She's been a part of our conversations now and very generous with her time. She's a prison director there, and actually we first had her on, well, at least publicly, during a reentry reform series that we started last April, and then she was just recently with us at Building Bridges. But we were able to really get a sense of the perspective that you brought, and how in looking at these systems in Norway, when you look at, all right, so if we're doing what's working, you would think that would be centered on recidivism, people not coming back, people not harming people when they leave, but actually being productive. And we know when we look at those systems, roughly 20% of people come back in the Norwegian system, where, you know, anywhere between 50 and 70% of people come back in the US. And when you're looking at those type of statistics, when you're saying, all right, I have my stocks and, you know, do I want them to go up 20% or 50%, or do I want to be batting 300 or 500 in baseball? It's very clear the answers to those questions, what you want to do. So I think for me, one of the questions that would be helpful for us to ask ourselves is, you know, can we at least agree that the current system isn't working? So I'd like to bring in Elin now. She, as I mentioned, and she's coming in from Norway, and as well as Terry O'Hanlon. He's a retired lieutenant from the Department of Corrections, and our own Daryl McGraw, reentry policy specialist at the IMRP. And I know Daryl and Terry have a long-standing relationship, and you know, this is the first time I believe Terry's met Ellen and John. But I'd love it to be just kind of a conversation. So you all have watched the film. Terry, I talked to you a little bit this morning. You know, would you have any questions of John or Ellen about this? Do you have any reflections yourself as you watch this as a former CO, about your experiences here in Connecticut?
I think my biggest concern, first of all, I love the film. Um, it was very well done, obviously. I think Norway's got it right, first of all. Um, Trying to make your prison system reflect your society um, is definitely the way that things should be done so people can rehabilitate and go back to society, not be locked in the cage for, you know, so many hours a day, so many days a week, 365 days a year. So kudos to Norway and the Nordic countries for doing it that way. Because, like Andrew said, the recidivism rate is a lot lower there than it is here. Um, just when you talk about people that are locked up for some pretty heinous crimes, but they're living in an environment that like the one I believe it was the warden from North Dakota said um, I think my biggest concern honestly is you have people that might be in for murder or whatever, but then they're in a kitchen with a knife. So I mean, just from a security point of view, that's one of the things I saw. Obviously, it works. Um, Obviously, they get their anger management classes if that's a problem. So, but other than that, I thought it was a phenomenal idea. Um, but really, that was my only biggest concern. I mean,
One of the things that struck me, from the perspective of the CEOs in the film, was when asked, what do you want at the end of the day? And to a person, they had said they wanted to go home safe. And it almost seemed like that was a foregone conclusion in the Norwegian system. And they were thinking about, well, how can I best influence this individual to bring out the best qualities in them so that they are able to be productive members of society? Do you feel like that accurately represents your experience in Connecticut, Terry?
no, I think it's COs or staff. I mean, one of the things that we're taught is, a good day is when you can go home safely to your family, and from the first day in the academy, a good day is when you can go home safe. Um, I like their model better. Um, Throughout my career, I was always the type of person. One of Norway's things that they mentioned was they're not there to punish them. They've already been punished. And that's the way I went throughout my career. You know, I wasn't given this job to punish anybody. They've already been punished by the criminal justice system. But yeah, definitely. I mean, just
Yeah.
going home every day was a safe and in one piece, and everybody made it out. Was pretty much the way they looked at it.
Ellen, how about you? At the end of the day, what do you reflect on, and what are you taught in your training in terms of your perspective on your role in the system?
The perspective is very different. I don't think I've ever gone home thinking, "Whew, I got out there alive." I'm just reflecting on what have we done today. We also have problems, of course, but I've always reflected on this is a good day, or today it didn't go that good because maybe we didn't have that good conversations that I would like to have. I didn't manage to do everything I would like to do. These sort of things am I concerning about when I go home, and I hope that we are just. My biggest concern is to get everybody through the day, inmates and the prison staff, both equally. So we have the best day we can have together.
Right. I'd like to bring, yes, John.
Just to add one point, I'm currently in the midst of making a new documentary series called Prison Project Little Scandinavia, which is about a prison just outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, where they are actually trying to recreate a unit within a prison according to some aspects of the Scandinavian penal system. I'm not here to talk about that project right now, but in that upcoming documentary, one of the aspects that we talk about a bit more, which is relevant to the thing we're talking about right now, is the training of the staff and the COs in Norway. And Aileen, please correct me if I use the wrong terminology or so, but it's a 2-year degree, you know, or a 2-year education with is it a bachelor's degree or something?
We are getting there soon. Soon it's a bachelor degree.
Yeah, and people apply to study to become correctional officers, and they pick and select the most appropriate ones, you know, to study in order to become a correctional officer. So already you have, you know, when Terry mentioned, you know, the training aspects from the first day on, you know, hear stuff like, you know, going home safe to your family. That's it. You know, you have like 4, 6, 8 weeks of training in the US compared to 2 years in Norway. That you have a huge difference from the get-go.
Yeah, we start with the typical human perspective, the respect for each other. That's where we start when we start our training.
And I know, and I'd like to bring Daryl into the conversation too, because we had some conversations, because we always love to lean on you, Ellen, for your perspective on things. And you were telling us about, I believe it was a niece that was starting up in the police force there, and you thought it was too early for her to go into it at 26. So one of the things that also is reflective on the longer training, it means that you're getting into the career maybe a little bit later on in life, which, you know, we know through, at least here in Connecticut, brain science, the later on you are, the better chances you're going to make rational decisions. And so I think that's might be another aspect of that amount of training too. But Daryl, you know, as someone who has been in Connecticut prisons, what's your reflection on seeing the situation in Attica and in Halden?
So yeah, man, I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate Kelvin centering us with the trial and all the stuff that's going on in our country. I think that was a great way to start. Appreciate Ellen and John for jumping on. Just want to, before I answer that, Indre, I just want to give us a little background and let me know if my video gets choppy, my internet doesn't like when I talk. So, you know, bringing Terry on was part of the, I call them T, but right, bringing him through was an honor and a privilege, because when I was going through my process and I was incarcerated, he was a CO there. Actually started out as a rookie. I mean, when I met him, I think he didn't even have his badge yet. But one of the things is through the whole time, he never changed. So the Norway model, he carried it himself. And then I know that there's a couple of people on the call. Like, I like to look around the room. I see Mike Norco, I see Mike Hines, I think Gary Roberge, my friends from adult probation and DCF are in the room. So we have these like-minded conversations within our state about treating people a certain way. So when you watch the Norway versus Attica, and I know I'm dating myself, but I know there's some OGs on the call as well who remember Summers prison from back in the day. And Attica reminded me of Summers when I went to Summers prison, which is now Osborne. And it was a really adversarial relationship, which is why I felt the relationship Terry and I have now is unique, and was unique, even though I didn't know, because I wasn't trying to conform to that system, nor was he. He was working there, I was there, but we were still human beings. And if nothing else that people take away from this call as we move forward as a state is that we want to get back to treating people as human beings. And I think Ellen said it the best, right? It was about, the first thing they start with when they train people is treating people as human beings, because nowhere in the state of Connecticut or even in a courtroom do they say, okay, you're going to get sentenced to 5 years of being dehumanized. Nowhere does it say that. It doesn't say you're going to get 5 years, because many of the cases, myself included, were done with plea bargains. If they said, oh yeah, you're going to get treated like an animal for 5 years or be disrespected for the next 5 years, I think people would less likely plead guilty to charges, right? But that's not what they say. They're saying you're getting 5 years. So it's supposed to be taking away the freedom. That is the punishment, taking away the freedom, not going into a system where people take it upon themselves to mistreat people. So if nothing else that we do here today, people, is have these conversations on how do we do better and reflect a more humane system with dignity. I appreciate everyone here. So there was a big difference, if that answers it in many different words, that my experience wasn't the same, but in certain pockets, dealing with certain people, it was almost like Norway. Like when we had those conversations, he even didn't say, what are you in for, treating me less? He didn't break any boundaries, and nor would I, because at that time, it was difficult. It was almost, it could have been dangerous for me to talk to the CO too long, because I could have looked like I was giving information. Or for him, with his colleagues talking to me too long, I won't even let you say it. I'll say that you'll look like an inmate lover, right? And we can change that inmate to anything else that we wanted as derogatory, but that could be the visuals, or perception is reality. So let's get into this conversation, man. Let's go. Let's get it.
Yeah, so I think what you're reflecting on is the difference between the model that we have, generally speaking, here in the US, and what's called dynamic security in the Norwegian and Nordic systems. And dynamic security is more about getting to know someone as a human. So if you know someone, you're less likely to hurt them. If I know you, I'm more likely for me to know that you are hurting. So the closer you are in that relationship, the more you're able to kind of monitor and understand how someone is. Where it's my understanding is, and I a visitor in the Department of Corrections, they're told, do not develop relationships no matter what. Is that true? Is that, Ellen, is that how you're taught in terms of dynamic security? And Terry, I'd love to hear from you in terms of the message you got in Connecticut DOC about relationships.
You can go ahead, Ed.
I go first. Yeah. It is like that. And I have, during the years, I've had a lot of bodyguards walking around the prison. I worked in a bigger prison before, in Oslo prison. The at that time it was the biggest prison in Norway. And when you get in contact with the inmates and you get a good relationship with them, whenever we got a new inmate into my floor, example, they were very quick with their finger and don't mess with her. We see you to the new inmates that comes. There are a lot of bodyguards around, and that's because we interact, we talk, I can be strict, but I can also be very humane. So we go together, and that's it's functioned very well.
Harry, any thoughts?
I think for myself, and quite a few people that I worked with, like Ellen said, we were, we followed the rules. We made sure people followed the rules, but we were human. We're human first, before anything else. No matter if you're on the outside or on the inside, no matter what color your skin is, we're all human first, and that's what matters. And they do tell you, don't build relationships, don't share too much of your personal information, because there's been stories and go on and on about people getting too close and end up in a romantic relationship with an inmate or some other type of relationship, bringing stuff in for them. But for me, it was just treating people like humans, getting to know them, whether I knew what they were in for or not, just getting to know them as a person. And Daryl will tell you that I think, within the first, encounters we had, we just knew that, there was going to be a relationship, outside. I would see him on the outside, at times. His oldest daughter went to school with my youngest son. So sometimes when he was out, we would run into each other at school. And we talk and we, joke around and then for whatever reason, we'd see each other again on the inside. But yeah, they tell you don't build relationships, but I think they mean more on a personal level, like sharing information, stuff like that. But to treat people, you can treat people like human without having a personal relationship.
Right. And I think that if I could add to that, it's just a narrative, right? So it was always the, from other CO friends that I have, people that I've known through the system. Actually, it's crazy. My neighbor is a CO. And it's interesting how the conversation is almost like you can't trust them. They're always like, I'm like, bro, I'm not trying to get your debit card number. I'm just trying to get a roll of toilet paper. I'm not trying to hustle you. But see, if you go in there with that mind state, then yeah, and if it's pumped into you, then therefore you think everybody's trying to get over on you. Now, mind you, there are some dudes that are trying to do this and trying to do that. I'm just trying to get some toilet paper, man. I'm not really trying, I'm just trying to do my time. And you know what we know from my own experience, many, I would say 80% is just trying to do their time and get home to their families. No different than the person that's working there. And this is why this inhumane system doesn't work, because I shouldn't even say it doesn't work, because advocates, and I know many of you are on the call, will say that the system is working just fine, which is why our recidivism rate is so high. And we need to start addressing how we want people to go home, because we're not responsible for how individuals go inside, but we should be, as taxpayers, as systems people, we should be concerned about how they come home. And that's why we're having this dialogue, bro. I'm glad to see you, man. Let's go.
Speaking of which, it brings me to the next big topic, and obviously we're not going to put bows on all of these things. It's more as a way to kind of get people thinking, and we're happy to explore this in any number of venues moving forward. But this concept of normality, and I know John in the film, you captured it, I think, quite well when you had John asking the warden at Attica, is it normal essentially for everybody to be able to see in everybody's cell, even when they're going to the bathroom, but when you go to Halden, you have your own bathroom, and then you have the folks that are inmates in Attica design their ideal system, and there they almost to a T design Halden. So maybe you can talk a little bit about normality and that concept and what that means in terms of being able to prepare people to be released. And I also wonder if the fundamental way that is designed also helps to encourage relationships and a mutual respect. John or Ellen, feel free.
Elin's the first-hand expert, but I can have a go. So one phrase that's been thrown around a lot, which is true, is that the punishment in Norway and in the Nordic countries is that your freedom is removed, but that's it. You can still vote, you can go to school, and you can cook. Literally at some of the facilities in Norway, for example, at Holden, but in other as well, you wake up, you make breakfast, take a shower, you walk to your workplace, which is in another place, so just like you would on the outside and so on. And if you need to have a doctor's appointment, you can go to that separately and so on. And the teachers in the school come from the outside, from the community. So they're servicing the inmates, just like the so to speak population outside. And the normal human to human communication with staff and so on. So in all aspects, your freedom is removed, and that's a really tough punishment in itself. But that's more than enough. But Elin, you're much more experienced in this than I am. So
yeah, but we are planning the days ahead. So like I do in my free time, I'm also planning my time. And so when they are going to have a nurse appointment, they're going to school, they know their schedule, they're waking up, they have to follow the time, like I have to be on time at work. And that's preparing them for the normality outside also. So if you're in a prison with no such thing as normality, I can't even imagine how difficult it would be to start just going to the store, going to school or a job, even the library. So we have also a little shop inside. They have the time they can go shopping there themselves. They have to plan their small meals they can have outside the regular ones. If they want candy, soda, etc. So they have to plan. They have the money. They have to plan what they're going to buy. So it's in my head, it's the only way to prepare them for real life after the sentence.
I found it was really telling when you had the guard in Halden kind of questioning, why would we have someone have a job sewing something or doing something that's just not reflective of what would be possible of them doing on the outside. And we've certainly heard that as a criticism in terms of, and I know the DOC is in Connecticut is trying to change that. But I think those of us that work in what we call here prisoner reentry, are always focusing on the point of reentry. What should happen to immediately try to ensure success for people when they're released? And it becomes like this kind of a dual system, like what's happening inside is separate from outside, and you have to put all your resources on that point of release to try to transition. But I think, like you say, Ellen, that if you haven't remotely experienced the normality of outside life prior to that, that's a very difficult transition. I don't know, Daryl, if you want to reflect on that with your experience or experiences in talking to other folks or
Yeah, man, thank you, man. This is a great conversation. We could do this all day. This is a training. Anybody that wants to do trainings, let's get it together. But one of the things that we'd be remiss not to say within the short period of time that we have is that our criminal justice system is a foundation of systemic racism, right? So we need to understand that this system was built off of white supremacy, born out of slavery. So a lot of that mentality goes into the way our people are treated currently right now. Tyrone made a great point in the chat box. We use the chat box, so anybody has any comments, feel free to jump in there and comment. But the difference is what we see on the Norway prison those are Norwegians, right? So everyone that comes into prison pretty much, and Ellen could correct me if I'm wrong, are viewed as Norwegians, countrymen. So when they go, they want their countrymen to go back out and be role models for their country. Well, in our country, because of the foundation of the criminal justice system and the prison system, there's always that adversarial relationship that, oh, you know what I mean, black and brown, and there's so much racism with that stem from that. The mistreatment of inmates is rooted in the foundation of our criminal justice system. So we need to really start to look at that when we talk about dismantling and recreating. That dehumanization is history of mistreating people, right? The food, all of that is by design, right? And it just grew into something that is out of control right now. And America incarcerates more people than any other country, right? So we can take cues from our friends from Norway and other systems and say, look, they treat people as human beings, but we got to get to a place where we're okay with treating black and brown people equally to white people. Overall, much more in our criminal justice system. Come on, man, let's go. Let's have this conversation. What are we doing?
Well, I thank you for that, Daryl. And, you know, I know in talking to John and Ellen, one of the things that people, when they view this and they see, well, Norway must have always been like this, is actually it was very punitive 20, 30 years ago, and it shifted. And I don't know if any of you would be willing to or could talk about that shift and what's happening. I also know it's been challenged. You know, it's challenged by some pretty significant events, and the country has decided to keep the current system versus going back to where it was. And one of the reasons why we're having this conversation in Connecticut is because, you know, we ballooned up to like 500 inmates per 100,000, you know, roughly, about 15 years ago. And now we've cut that in half. And the question we have is, what's next? Can we get to a point that Daryl's talking about? Can we get there? What conversations do we need to have? I'd love to hear your perspective on that change in Norway.
I can have a go, and once again, Aileen, please correct me if I'm saying something stupid. Trying to keep it short. Just like Andrew said, 20, 30 years ago, the prisons in Norway, in this case, they had huge problems, you know, fights, violence, and so on, and you know, bad numbers, both in the inmate population's size and also recidivism rate and so on. And then there was a murder, I believe, of one or two COs, and that led to a huge discussion within society. You know, what should we do now? We're not doing the right thing, and it led to a white paper being written with huge political consensus in the country that we need to take a step towards rehabilitation. You know, and that was a long, slow process with lots of resistance from many levels of society within the system as well, from correctional officers as well. You know, we're not social workers, blah blah blah. They heard everything times 10. So, but they did it, and now the Norwegian correctional services are acclaimed to be, you know, perhaps the best one in the world. And for example, one incident that in my opinion, you know, shows extremely well the strengths of the current Norwegian system is the fact that a year or two ago there was a serious inmate in one Norwegian facility where an inmate threw, I think, boiling water on another inmate or tried to stab him or something. And you know, if something like that happens, your instinct might be, you know, okay, we'll have to punish that bastard who did that to that other inmate. But no, the correctional officers and you know, the inmates contact officers, which is what they call them, you know, the people most close to the inmates, which they have a personal, not private, but a personal relationship with. So they know each other pretty well. So the contact officers said that, okay, we didn't succeed in our own work in you know, being able to notice that this inmate was feeling bad or aggressive or something. And that's our failure. So it was not the inmate's fault. Of course, he was, I think, taken away from the situation to not an isolation cell, but to calm down in order to question him what happened and so on. But that's it, for an hour or two or something like that. But the problem that they identified was that the system didn't notice that the inmate was aggressive or felt bad or something. So they blame themselves and want to do better from that onwards. And that shows a great deal about how they think about these issues.
Yes, and he got a new sentence for that, and that's the biggest difference between the systems, maybe, because the prison is not punishing him for what he did, but the system, he got a new sentence, and that's one thing, and the prison sentence is something else. So not the double punishment.
And I'm seeing a lot of the chat blowing up, and I just want to remind folks in 2 minutes, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And for those that want to go into the breakout rooms, please find on the bottom of your screen under reactions, and you can, well, where is it that we raise our hand? I think it's on the right side. You can either raise your hand or give a thumbs up in the reactions, and then we'll see you, and then we'll put you in separate breakouts where we can continue these conversations. I didn't ask because we've asked so much time of the panelists already to stay on, but you guys are more than welcome to do so. I do know it's night there, and Terry, you're setting aside some time too. But then we'll come back in about 45 minutes to reflect on those individual conversations. We'll also, in this room, we will have Aileen Keyes, a colleague of ours, is going to be moderating a panel on international perspectives with regards to children with incarcerated parents, and have some dynamic folks from overseas to talk about that particular issue. So if you want to stay in the room, don't do anything. If you want to go into moderated dialogues where you'll be able to exchange these conversations amongst yourselves in smaller groups, please put a thumb up and or a hand up, or even just put in the chat that you want to go into the dialogue, and we'll do that. And while that's happening, I just want to ask one question. We can go in multiple different directions here, but I know that Leighton Johnson's on the call. There's been a big conversation about solitary confinement. We've closed Northern and the like, and I know there's been some questions about the Norwegian versus the US, like with different cultures and whatnot. And I'm just, Ellen, for you and maybe for John, if there is a serious situation, my understanding is that there is something like segregation and that you do administrative seg. Can you tell us a little bit about how that is and how it works there? And maybe, I don't know, John, if you were able to ask that question in the US and for comparison.
Yeah, we have that opportunity. At my prison, we have two cells who are in separate. So if an inmate attacks another inmate or an officer, or trying to hurt himself, we start by we are going into the situation, trying to calm the situation. If that doesn't work, we have to try to move the person first to another place. If that doesn't work, we have this security cells that we call them, where there's nothing in them, so they can't hurt themselves or nobody else. But the big difference is we keep them there as short time as possible, and they've been seen to by nurses or doctors already in an hour after they got there, and they're out of there as soon as everything cools down. They're out of there. So it's just just to take a situation to, if you have to take something direct out of a situation, that's the only way we use it.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just would like to ask, as we're moving people into the various rooms, any final thoughts from Daryl, Terry, John? John, I know you're working on the Pennsylvania documentary and you talked about going into youth. So maybe start with Terry and then go to Daryl and then finish with John.
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say thanks first to my friend Daryl for the invite. Love you, brother.
Love you too, bro. Let's do it.
Let's do it. We need to do more of this. And to Ellen and John and Andrew, Norway's got it right. I mean, it's proven. And if it's possible, just do it here. Let's they should be doing it. Numbers don't lie. So very honored. Thank you all. Thanks. Great documentary, John. I loved it. I actually told Andrew earlier, I actually went on and listened to the deputy superintendent do his presentation at Attica about the prison, and I watched that also. Very well done. Very impressive. It's time to make the change. And like Daryl said, it's based on racism. I mean, that's how our prison system started. Let's be honest. It is what it is. And those things need to change. Change it in the community, change it in the prison system, change it everywhere. Because the color of someone's skin shouldn't define how they are treated in society. It's ridiculous. It's been going on way too long, and it needs to change. And it needs to change now. There's no, we'll look at it. No, it needs to change. Bottom line. So Andrew, again, thank you. Daryl, we'll be in touch. John, and thank you.
No, listen, man, you already said, man, this is why my network is my net worth, man. This is why I hang with people that are good people, man, and this is what we do. One of the sweet spots about Connecticut, before everybody goes off into these breakout rooms, and we will explain that specifically so people, because I know I'm getting some texts and people are unsure how this breakout thing's going to work. So, but the one point that I wanted to make is, thank you, Terry, once again, man, just for showing up and being you. And thank you for being you, because you being you helped me be me today. So I just want to say that in public. You being you helped me be who I am today. That's a great father, a citizen, a business owner, a homeowner, and all those things, because you didn't treat me less than, and many other people along the journey also took the time to treat me as a human being. So I really appreciate that, brother. And we're going to do some great work together. But one of the things, the sweet spot is this. Connecticut is known as a leader, right? We're known as a leader in criminal justice reform. So what we do, the world is watching. So, and definitely our country is watching. So we have an opportunity to do some things differently. So we can move from the status quo, and we can take our system and change it. We got many people, like I said, members from the community, systems from the community, public defender's office, probation, we got parole, we got all these different CSSD, all these members that are on the call right now. So how do we shift this structure? DCF. So many of our partners, we can say we are no longer going to do business like that, and we are going to change this together. We can make change. So this is what we need to do. I encourage you to stick around for the breakout rooms, because I see my people from Everyday Democracy is here. What we're going to do, if you want to go to a breakout room, put your first name in the chat, pop it in there. I believe that's the way we're doing it. Raise your hand. So you jump into those breakout rooms, and we talk about what we can do further, and then we're going to come up with some action steps and move forward. I want to thank everybody that jumped on, took the time out to be a part of this conversation. Much needed, man. Ellen, always a pleasure to have you in the room. John, thank you for your documentary. What a gift to everyone that's incarcerated. We really appreciate it, and we're going to keep moving forward. Andrew, I'm going to push it to you. And where are we going next?
Just one final thought from John.
Well, many short final thoughts, but I'll be brief. There are so many issues here. Andrew, you raised the question of can we agree on that the system isn't working. I think data speaks for itself. I'm I'm pragmatic, and if you look at the data, the current system in the US is not that good. It's not working well. So does it have to cost a lot of money? I saw that in the chat there was a comment about that as well. You know, how much the Nordic countries and Norway use, you know, per inmate and so on. Well, you know, keeping an inmate in prison for a bunch of years costs a whole lot of money as well. And you know, that person can rather become a productive member of society, you know, instead of, you know, costing much as an inmate. So, you know, what's the cost of a human life, you know? So you know, but I'll stop here. Andrew, I'll be happy to hang around for an hour or so. So just tell me where I need to be. So.
Great, thank you. We'll put you in one of the breakout rooms so people can ask questions and bring you into the conversation. So thank you everyone. And for those that are sticking around, again, Aileen Keyes is going to be moderating a panel in this particular room, the main room, on children with incarcerated parents from an international perspective. Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, John. Thank you, Terry. Really appreciate it. And hopefully these conversations continue, and maybe we can even get some folks from Connecticut over to Norway to kind of kick the tires and see how it works there. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I understand some people may still be being moved into breakout rooms for facilitated dialogue. Again, if you want to stay in this room to listen in on another panel of experts from across the world talking about the correctional systems over in their regions with a focus on families and children with incarcerated parents, then please stay here. If you would like to engage in a facilitated dialogue about the film and what you think our systems can change in the United States, then please put your first name in the chat or raise your hand if you have that option. But I'm going to get started with our panel. So thank you, everybody that does want to continue to listen in. I'm very excited about our talk and our guests today. As you know, if for those who were able to watch the film before today's event, in the film, the incarcerated individuals conceptualized the perfect prison. That was an exercise that they engaged in. In that ideal prison, they agreed that one of the most important things for someone to rehabilitate themselves was family, contact with their family specifically. Since we know that more than half of the incarcerated individuals in the world, and more so a higher percent for women, are parents, we found that it was appropriate to dedicate a breakout session to those parents and their families. So this breakout session is titled Incarcerated Parents and Their Children, a comparison of experiences in Latin America and the Caribbean, Europe, and the United States. First, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and allow them to introduce themselves because they will do a much better job than I. So please, why don't we start with Nancy's coming up first on my screen. So Nancy, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. Really pleased to be able to be here, and yeah, there's so much to talk about with these discussions. So I'm Nancy Loucks. I'm Chief Executive of an organisation in Scotland called Families Outside, and we work solely on behalf of children and families affected by imprisonment. I also chair the International Coalition for Children with Incarcerated Parents, which is a global network that does a lot of what we've been doing earlier this evening in terms of comparing practice in different countries and learning, you know, how can we learn from each other to do things differently, to do things better. I'll stop there. I've got more to say, but I'll leave it for later.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I'm sure you both have a lot to say. You've both been working in this field for a very long time. Luciano, would you please introduce yourself for everybody?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon. For me, I'm here in Buenos Aires. I am the program officer for the protection of the rights of a child at the Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean for Church World Service. Church World Service is a US-based organization that in the region has played a major role in making visible the situation of the 2.5 children with incarcerated parents that we have. We have done this with other 9 organizations from the region. We have created a network similar to the one that Nancy's organization is part in Europe, which is called NAPES, which is the acronym for Children with Incarcerated Parents in Spanish. And I'm here basically because I'm the only one from that network that speaks Spanglish. So I'll try to do my best to convey, I think, the voices and the things that I've learned mostly from children and from family members and from parents that are in prison over these years. So opinions are my own, but I'll try to convey everything what I learned from them.
Thank you. And I think you underestimate your skills and your knowledge, but I think we all have a tendency to do that. So I'm very grateful that you were both here today. And with your disclaimer that your opinions are your own, I want to provide a disclaimer for myself as well. I will be referencing some practices as being American practices. However, I want to acknowledge that our correctional systems are separate and can be quite diverse within this nation. America has its federal system, but also state. Some states or most states have county systems and also city jails. So even within the same state, facilities can operate their correctional systems vastly differently. And so although I'll be referencing kind of how things are done in the United States, I do want to recognize and acknowledge that things can be quite diverse throughout the country and even within small states like Connecticut. I think a good place to start based on the film would be a look at humanity in corrections. With regard to parents, since humanity was a true underlying theme of the whole film, and we're focusing in this breakout session on parents and children, do you two know of ways in which prisons do or do not recognize the incarcerated individuals in their facilities as parents specifically? And I'll say in America, and again, generally speaking, the fact that someone is a parent is either completely ignored, or actually we have heard can lead to harsher treatment at times from folks in corrections, because there seems to be a mindset that not only have you caused some sort of harm to society or our communities, but you have also victimized, in a sense, your children with your involvement in the criminal justice system. And that, again, is not my perspective. I'm saying this is the perspective that we have heard from some in corrections. So have you seen or experienced examples of correctional systems in your general regions that do seem to recognize and acknowledge the individuals there as being parents, and in what ways, if you could? Should I call on people, I guess, or do you want to kind of raise hands? Nancy, do you want to take that? Thanks.
Happy to dive in. What's interesting, just backing up slightly, is that the UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, which UN nations have agreed, the Nelson Mandela rules, actually requires correctional establishments to record whether someone has caring responsibilities, and that's supposed to be a standard practice under Rule 7. I'm not aware of any country that actually does that systematically. So we do see that the status of someone being a parent getting lost, and those children getting lost as a result of that. There is good practice in many countries. Just looking at Scotland, because that's obviously the one I'm most familiar with. Visits, for example, are a right of the parent. You can't remove a visit as a punishment for someone, unless an incident takes place as a result of a visit, someone trying to traffic drugs, and even then they're allowed to have a visit, but just with the glass partition, which is not standard practice. Most visits are in the open, in person. And you mentioned before about I think sentencing practice as well. We do recognize in our courts that having caring responsibilities should be taken into account in sentencing. I do have some reservations about that, because what you don't want is the families to become a tool for mitigation. You want families to be, and children in particular, to be recognized as having rights themselves. So even if offense is so serious that prison is the only option, we still need to look at what that means for children. It's not just, does it make a difference for the sentencing decision or not? It's what does this mean for the family left behind? So I'll leave that. Luciano, your turn.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that. On one side, I would say yes, because I think because of our culture as well, which I guess you know a lot because you have a lot of Latino families there. Family is really important. And actually, I remember when we had visits from the States and we visit prisons in the DR or in Uruguay or in Argentina, they all were surprised by how much the fact that the visits are contact visits is respected in comparison to what I've seen. I only visit one prison in the States, but from what I heard, most of the visits, unless there are special days, and correct me if I'm wrong, are sometimes not so contact visits, which is something that for us it is really important. We are contact people, and so in that regard, that aspect is sort of respected. But then the places where the visits take place are in general awful. There's no effort from the prison system. And again, as you said, Aileen, I'm generalizing in terms of different systems and countries and what I know, but in general, prison visit rooms are awful, and there's no encouragement from the prison system to strengthen that bond, because it's maybe rooted in what you said, in that mindset that is not a good parent or a good model for the children. So we have tried to change that. We have tried to organize play days in prisons, and most of those days have gone great, and they have been peaceful, and they have been awesome experiences. Despite this, it seems like the prison prefers not to work on this, make an effort to organize those type of things. They prefer to stick to the rules, to stick to the normal circumstances, and stay like that. For us, what we've seen is it's advantages both for the parents, for the children, and for the prison itself during that day. It seems like it decreases the level of violence when the children are there playing and staying together. And similarly, I think the guys yesterday, when I watched the film, they were talking about parenting workshops or something like that. That is something that from what I know, doesn't happen anywhere. I share with you a blog that I can share later on the chat of an experience that we did here in Argentina, in one of the most historic prisons, where actually the parents themselves ask us to have a space, to have a moment, to have a meeting where they could talk about them as a parent and them as children, as former children, and think about the relationship they had with their parents and how that influences the relationship they had with the children currently. So, not in a nutshell because I talk so much, but more or less that's the situation. I think there is a lot to improve. Unfortunately, visits and all that is used as a way of punishing people because of what they do inside without taking into consideration the best interest of the child at all. Kids that travel 4 hours to see a parent in prison and suddenly he's locked down, and so he won't be able or she won't be able to see him. That's sad. And one more thing that I want to say, I don't know how it's in other countries, but in Argentina, for example, mothers are also recognized. And actually, as we speak, there is an audience happening with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, where colleagues of us are participating. We are trying to make the court explain that and think about the particularities of mothers that live in prison with their children. Many people want that to stop happening, but in relation to what you said, since the system recognizes as mothers, they give them the right in certain countries and to up to certain ages to live with their children in the prison if they want.
I definitely want to come back to that. I'm glad you brought that up. I did want to touch on a couple of things that you and Nancy had mentioned. One thing that Nancy had mentioned was that it was a right of visiting with your family is a right, and it's not a privilege. Where in the United States, it really is considered a privilege that can be taken away, if you will, to try and remedy behavior. And I understand corrections needs to have tools to try to keep the peace in the facilities. I understand and I respect that need, but I think our arguments, if you will, would be that a relationship with family, it's counterproductive, that we know from health of the incarcerated individual, the parent, if you want them to be healthy and to have positive behavior, you really want to enhance and encourage that communication and that contact. And we know from some studies that recidivism reduces when the incarcerated individual has regular contact with their loved ones, and also homelessness following reentry. But we also know now research has been coming out about the health benefits to children and the negative consequences of parental separation that can result. One thing that Nancy had touched on also was sentencing and considering children or families, and you said caring at the time of sentencing. That's something that America, different states have grappled with. is considering what here has been called family impact statements, or New York had passed family responsibility statements. And it sounds similar, where we'd be describing what responsibilities, parental responsibilities, a defendant has to children, and what impact potential incarceration would have on those children. It's something that in Connecticut we've tried to pass for many, many years, and it just had not been successful. But there is some debate. I had followed up with New York after they had passed family responsibility statements to ask how it was going, and I spoke with the Osborne Association, who I imagine you two are quite familiar with, and they had said that actually some judges seemed to sentence more harshly when they knew that the defendant was a parent. And it kind of goes back to the mindset I mentioned earlier, where they look at the defendant and say, oh my gosh, not only did you do this thing to our community, but you also, look what you did to your kids. And it's kind of this, maybe the kids would be better off if you were just, you know, they had some time away from you kind of mindset. Certainly the judges aren't saying that on the stand, but that seems to be the mindset that we're hearing about. Going back to something you just touched on, Luciano, with mothers, and I want to get at kind of the sexism with all of this as well, but with mothers, at times when a mom is going to serve a term of imprisonment, they are allowed to, or they do, bring their children with them. Could you discuss that a little bit more? Because I have heard of that in various countries overseas, where up to, and then the child can stay with the mother up to a certain age. If you can please describe that a little bit, because I think that's a completely foreign idea for most people in the United States.
Well, what is there to explain is actually, and it was just said on the audience that I was participating on earlier on, that despite that the mothers have the right to decide whether they want their kids to stay with them. For example, in Argentina, up to the age of 4, the prisons are not prepared for that. There's no prison that has been prepared for women with children in there. And that was one of the things that was actually presented to the court, that they are all prisons prepared for men, and they have been adapted, if you will, for mothers that live in there with the children, with conditions that actually, the conditions that we saw from the film from the US prisons are much better than the ones that where women live here. Actually, I was thinking yesterday about that, the contrast between Norway and any Latin American prison. I would think it would be much stronger in terms of at least the view and the characteristics of the place and the cleanliness and so on. In any case, so that's the situation. Mothers can opt for that if the kids are below 4, and they can stay there, but the access to health and to the care for the children and to appropriate food and nutrition, it's really worrisome. And that's why many advocates, of course, we are trying to ask for alternative measures for mothers to stay at home with their children when that's the case, which is not the final solution, because sometimes women that are under house arrest really struggle and have complicated situations, as we have just shown on a document we produced not long ago. So that's more or less the situation. But that's all going back to something you mentioned slightly, is how much the interest of the child is taken into consideration when sentencing parents. When sentencing a mother, that's taken into consideration. When sentencing a father, that's almost never taken into consideration. Actually, you asked me to share with you some examples of, I have one that I found about a parent that was granted a home arrest because he was a single father. Yeah, so, but that's 1 in a million, that never happens. And all the responsibility of motherhood falls again on the woman, with all the things that we know that carries on. So that's more or less the situation. And the one thing also, the system doesn't coordinate well the exiting of those children. So when the kids become 4, the kids are not prepared, the mother is not prepared, and the families that is going to receive that child is not prepared either. So those are one of the, I'd say, the missing links that I think we are trying bring together, to connect the penitentiary system with the protection system and with the family, so they can all work together to prepare that handover, if you will, in an appropriate way. Because, and this is something I want to say, and I don't know if terrorists is still there, but one thing that I also think is sometimes we want to ask the prison system to take care of, to deal or to care about something that is not their responsibility, which is the children that are outside, or the children that come visit. Yes, the situation should be good, but when the children are out there, or they have to leave the prison, in our case in Argentina or in our region, it's other people's responsibility. And sometimes we as advocates, we get confused and we end up asking prisons to care about something that is maybe not their responsibility. Besides the fact of all the other things that we can talk about prisons, that's one thing that we learned over the years, that despite those children live in there or they visit there, they're still children. They should be taken care by the authorities that care for children's rights, and not because of prison rights. And if something bad happens, they are not to blame. The people that should be taking care of that is children's rights authorities or protection systems. That's my point.
Thank you. Nancy, did you? Yeah.
I just wanted to come in. I think that's some of the difficulty, though, is that more often than not, no agency has responsibility for these children. And that's part of the difficulties. They fall between every single gap that exists. And there might be social services involved or something, but often there's not. And children in that situation just get lost entirely. So it is a real concern.
To that point about getting lost, as you know, as I'm sure you've heard of, the CDC has identified adverse childhood experiences, and having a family member incarcerated has been identified as one of those adverse experiences that can lead to long-term negative health outcomes for children. And so there is an appropriate, I think, push to see how we can support children who have experienced multiple adverse childhood experiences, because we have seen just how serious the health consequences are for them throughout their whole lifespan. There's some concern with the methods that are being considered, at least in the United States, and how they could have actually some unintended negative harm, adding harm to the children. Some things have been, letting the schools know if the police were at the house that night before or something. But then that can lead to, that can exacerbate biases against families that have criminal justice system involvement. And now not only is that student experiencing something at home, but now they go to school, people know they're being treated differently. A cell phone goes missing in the classroom and suddenly they're the suspect because the teacher, whether consciously or not, is making a connection between there being police involvement at the house and now this children must have done it, again, whether that's conscious or not. Have you two seen any efforts to respond, if you will, to the ACEs to track children? We were just saying how no one kind of oversees these kids to ensure that they are doing okay and to provide the supports for them. Connecticut also has developed in the last few years an Office of Early Childhood. And, they are wanting to be really active and looking at what they can do to better support kids. Have you seen anything in your regions that you think either has been successful that we may want to look at and consider, and also maybe some warnings, this was tried and it, didn't go well, that we should, listen to?
I'd say for us, it's something that we're really wrestling with, because there is a question about, if you know who these children are, if they're identified, then you can provide support and so on, but how much that is their right to keep that information private as well is a real question. So, are we talking about mandatory reporting here, or are we talking about providing an environment where people feel comfortable to come forward and ask for support? So it's something that certainly within our organization, within Children of Prisoners Europe, which we're also part of, it's something we're wrestling with, and we're not quite sure what that looks like. We do know that it can make a huge difference depending on who's asking these questions, for what purpose, when they're asking, why they're asking, what they're going to do with that information, because the families have to put a great deal of trust in people to take that information and to use that for whatever reason. And I don't think we've quite worked out the best way of doing that, whatever that looks like. We do know that if you're talking about adverse childhood experiences, that if a child has had a member of the household imprisoned, as one of the 10 ACEs is, they also have a 5 times greater likelihood of experiencing other ACEs. So you can assume that trauma is there. You don't have to know the exact number, but if you can look at trauma-informed approaches, the type of training that the prison staff receive in Norway, for example, I think is really, really important, because you're looking at humans, you're looking at support, having someone they can trust, having an environment where they feel safe. And that includes the visits context as well. If you're in a visiting environment where the decor is more relaxed, so the furnishings are more relaxed, you don't have a glass panel in between, you're not hearing lots of loud noises and keys rattling and all that sort of thing. It's trying to make that as friendly and comforting as possible, because these children have already been through trauma, and if they're seeing prison staff walking around in uniforms that look like the one where who arrested their dad, that's going to be traumatizing. So it's trying to recognize, I mean, we had an incident in a prison in Glasgow where a child was absolutely terrified to move from the kind of play area where he was playing to go and sit with his dad, because he didn't want to pass the prison staff, because they were the ones who looked like the people who tore up his teddy bear when they were, raiding the house. So it was, it's really, really hard, and it's trying to recognize that and recognize how we can support families to best effect. I'll stop there. I've got so much more to say.
I know I'm struggling with that as well. And one thing, to your point, just to continue on that, I've also heard of, when children go to visit, if they feel that they witness corrections officers not being very friendly and welcoming, already children have intense fear for their parents' well-being. There is a toxic stress, an ongoing worry about how their parent is being treated and if they're okay. And then when the child goes to visit, if they see that the officers are actually not being so friendly and everything, then that just exacerbates the fear. One thing, let's see, there's so much to talk about, and we only have a few minutes, and we do have a question I want to get to. I appreciate the question being asked. I think one thing I'd like to touch on really quick, if possible, is communication. That was something that specifically the individuals in the film had mentioned, is communication with their family. If the family cannot come to visit in person, about video visits they had mentioned, emails they had mentioned. What forms of communication do you have available in your facilities, but also which, if any, are free?
I'll just dive in straight. It's interesting. It took the pandemic for us to get video visits. We didn't have them before. And it's something that has been provided for free. And it's something that we have been reassured will continue alongside in-person visits. They're not to replace in-person visits, and that would be considered to be, again, breach of human rights. And we're trying to fight for them to remain free as well. People in prison were also issued with mobile phones, interestingly. So they all have their own mobile phone that they can have in their cell, and they get 300 minutes a month free. Works out to 10 minutes a day, so it's not a huge amount, especially if you're locked in because you're under quarantine. But it's something that, again, was introduced due to the pandemic and will stay. Something that was actually recommended by the Chief Inspector of Prisons for mental health, to support the mental health of young people in prison. So that's something that we have. We do have to pay for emails, oddly enough. It's because they print them out and then give them to the person in prison, and yeah, it's silly. They do get a letter a week for free if they want to do that. If they want to use like a pay phone, then they have to pay for that themselves. And I would imagine that once pandemic conditions have reduced, that they might have to start paying for the mobile phones as well. But yeah, the family contact is recognized and supported as being absolutely critical to people's mental health, well-being, reduction of suicide risk, all these types of things, as well as family contact, and which is the child's right. Under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Scotland has just incorporated into domestic law. So I'll stop there.
And also I'd like to say, it also helps with institutional behavior, connection with family. That's something that we try and get out there so that corrections may consider this more openly. That, if I can't imagine being separated suddenly from my 3-year-old and not being able to communicate with them, and yeah, it would not go well. Luciano, did you have anything that you wanted to share with regard to that? And then I'll get to the
No,
question.
similarly, something happened here in particular in Argentina. We have a provincial system, the Buenos Aires province, which is the biggest and house half of our prisoners' population, that allowed cell phone use, paying themselves, not paid by the system. They had to pay themselves, but that allowed for the prisoners to have cell phones officially and have the chance to talk to their families. So what the Prisoners Association's family here in Argentina did, they created sort of tools to help parents to communicate their children. So based on our support from CWS, they created that is being distributed among prisoners in Argentina. So the kids and the parents have the same exercise. So because sometimes what the parents say is, I don't know how to talk to my kids. I don't know what to talk about because of all this disconnect that we as parents usually have with our children, that it gets increased when a parent is in prison and the kid is at home. So that's the only thing I would highlight. I know they use Skype and stuff like that, mostly to talk to judges, but not so much to talk to families. They are allowed to use them to talk related to their case, but not related to the family. And the families themselves don't use it so much, or it's not widely used, I would say. So there's not much to say besides that thing that happened in Argentina here because of the pandemic, and we hope that is there to stay.
Great, thank you both. And real quick, because I don't know if we're going to suddenly get cut off, so I'm going to try and get to this question. Kathy Nazario had asked if we are aware of any collaborations that have been established with the school system in other countries when it comes to supporting children with incarcerated family members. Luciano, do you want to take it since you're still on the screen? And then we'll go to Nancy.
I think Nancy can talk more because I got to know families outside because of the experience they have with teachers. But for us, school plays a key role in this whole thing. And one thing I want to say as my final intervention is that although we are speaking related to prison, we're speaking about children with incarcerated parents in prisons, most of children with incarcerated parents do not visit prisons and do not live in prison. They live in communities, they go to clubs, they go to school, and they are out there. So when thinking about ACEs and the impact of ACEs and all that, we need to think about working with schools, with protection systems, with clubs, with anyone that is in contact with them, to know that this is something that might be happening to them. Because in general, at least what happens here, because of discrimination and stigma and so on, they hide it. Yeah, and we have related to ACEs, the last thing I would say is we have done a study, and I'll share it with you because it's in English, that where we compare children that live in households with someone is incarcerated with children that live in households, same characteristics, but where there's no one incarcerated. And the difference is, for example, in their education trajectory, it's really, really big. So in poverty, in access to education and so on, the difference is big. So there is something there that we need to pay attention to. But most of children with incarcerated parents are outside, and the school can play a key role in supporting and taking care of those children.
Thank you, Luciano.
The coping study in Europe, which compared 4 different European countries, identified schools as absolutely pivotal for support for children. So that was really important. One of the things that we do at Families Outside is we actually provide training for teachers. We take them into prison to experience what a visit is like, and then run a workshop for them in the visits hall about the impact of imprisonment and what their role is in supporting children in their classes. And we have an online resource for teachers to use to run sessions in their classrooms about stigma and so on, and just to introduce the conversation. And the number of children who come forward as a result of that conversation that people never knew about that or in that experience is really, really important. Children of Prisoners Europe also has a toolkit on their website about schools and support for children, so it's worth looking that up as well.
Thank you. And I'm so glad you said all of that. I was going to say training to me is key. As we look to the ACEs, how that information is received, certainly how it's collected, it has to be sensitive, and is it voluntary or mandatory? But if the people who are receiving the information have been adequately trained, then hopefully the children will receive support, and it will help to enhance awareness of implicit biases that may or may not exist, and a greater understanding of how to support children. And so I'm a firm advocate for training for all of those. I think we have a question, but we might be cut off soon. Let's see. Do any of these supports go beyond young children to include young adults? That's an interesting question. Does anybody have anything to say on that? And if we get cut off, I apologize.
Just be very quick. Yes, certainly our own organization supports people of any age, any sentence length, any location. Yeah, so that's not a criteria. We do have some specific peer support groups and things for young people.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are sometimes the best informers, I think, because they have the maturity and the experience to share in a great way the impact that this had in their lives. And actually tomorrow, 2 of them are going to be presented to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and they're going to be talking about the impact that this had in their lives.
That's amazing. I think one thing is continuing these conversations, even across state borders for us, going back to visiting real quick in Connecticut, our maximum security facilities, our contact visits, or even all of our cities, really, our contact visits are a brief hug and kiss in the beginning, brief hug and kiss at the end. And during the visit, you're across the table and you cannot cross that table. And there's no toys or anything for the most part. Right over the border in New York, maximum security facilities, it's like a daycare center in some of the areas. They'll have these children sections that are completely child friendly. The officers aren't even in that specific part of the room. They can touch the entire time. The children can sit on their lap. And then getting back to sentencing practices, I think there's just so much that we can unpack and talk about, and that we should continue these conversations. I think COPE is an amazing organization, and that it brings together European nations on this specific topic. And I think, Luciano, your work with Latin American Caribbean nations and how that's a regional and looking at neighboring areas, it's so crucial. And I hope that we can do more of this. So thank you both so much. I'm getting word that we're going to be coming back together again, so I hesitate to start a new topic. I guess, does anybody have any last thoughts? Or Andrew, I see you've popped up now, so should I just toss it to you?
No, you can have last thoughts. People are coming back, so.
Oh, I think my 3-year-old band is coming too, so I'll mute myself.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Aileen, and thank you, Luciano and Nancy. So important to have your perspective and joining us and taking your time to do so. So thank you so much. And I welcome everybody back. I believe folks are back from the breakouts. I see, Nancy, you put some information in the chat room in terms of what you do. And so I encourage people to do that. Go there and take a look at that. I just would like to say, as people are coming back and before we have the report backs from the breakouts, I want to remind people to save the date. Our next event is going to be May 18th. We're going to be going back to 7 p.m. We did it at noon to 2 on a beautiful day because we had our international guests and we wanted to be respectful of them not having to participate at 2 in the morning. So we thank them for that. But we'll be back at 7 p.m. May 18th. And as we commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, the May 18th One State, One Film program will examine where we are as a society a year later, mental health and strategies for coping with racial trauma. And so I'm sure that will be another important conversation. We look forward to your participation then. We'll also remind folks that this is being recorded and we'll send out a recording to everybody that signed up. We also will give information about where it will be posted as well. You'll be receiving a survey. We ask you to take the survey. The surveys in the past, we've learned that people want to have more time to be able to talk to one another, which is why we created the breakout groups. Please, thank you for bearing with us because it was a new format for us and we're working out some of the kinks, but we intend to keep that as we move forward as well. So please take that survey. If you have any other topics you'd like to talk about, if you'd like to expand on this topic and bring it into conversations in other places, we'd be more than happy to try to facilitate that on the behalf of the collaborative. So we have folks coming back from the breakouts now, and in terms of working out the kinks, we hadn't exactly talked about how this would happen. So I'd like to just ask the folks from Everyday Democracy, who I know were the facilitators, if one of you would like to step up and report back from your particular breakout. I believe Sagacity was part of one, although he might not be back yet.
Yeah, Sagacity's still here.
Oh, you're still there. All right.
Yes, I'm
Floor's
sticking
you.
out to the end. All right, Keen. So we had a nice group. What we did do, we had a good conversation, and Francine and anyone else in my group who wants to provide a couple thoughts too, that'd be great. And we talked a bit about juveniles and the difference between, you know, their experiences here when incarcerated as well as there. And we also had a decent conversation around some of the barriers that are preventing Connecticut and, you know, the United States in general from moving towards a less punitive model of incarceration. That's a really, really quick summary. We talked about it a bit more, but I wanted to keep it as brief as possible.
Great, thank you. And we weren't exactly sure how many breakouts we'd have. We were prepared for more, but it turns out we had one, and it sounds like you had a good conversation. Anybody else want to report back from that group? Anybody want to share any thoughts?
Yeah, Sagacity was a great facilitator. I just wanted to just say that Sagacity was a great facilitator. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not. I'm not sure at this point where my internet goes crazy. But I also appreciate the conversation. Terry actually joined the room. We also had Dawn from the Public Defender's Office, where we had the opportunity actually to talk with John too, in reference to what he's seen from different, the feeling of different facilities, Norway and the United States. And I think that we really, we have an opportunity to do some really cool stuff. And I appreciate everyone that stayed on so far, which means this conversation is just as important to you as it is to us. But not only forgetting about us, but the individuals that are locked in cells right now. This conversation is important for them to be here too. So I appreciate everyone the work that you do and sticking around and just being open to this dialogue, because we can no longer continue to treat people inhumanely because they made some poor choices, and a lot of those choices, as many of you know, are based on poverty and other things that are going on in their life, mental health and all these different things. And sometimes even with today, while we're watching things happen currently, we're kind of missing the point that how people end up in cells, how people end up making these decisions, and then how they're treated through the system. So we definitely need to do some work. Sagacity took us there, so appreciate it. And Francine was part of it too. So I really appreciate the work that Everyday Democracy does. If you don't know the work that they do, I encourage you to get to know them. If you haven't seen the film, I encourage you to watch it so you really understand what we're talking about as we continue to have these dialogues moving forward and inviting real people to have real conversations.
Thank you so much, Daryl and Sagacity. At this point, I'd like to invite everybody, if you'd like, turn on your video if you have any questions, any comments, any thoughts. Feel free to, I don't know if anybody has the ability to raise your hand, but we'll all be cordial and respectful. So if someone has a burning comment that they want, go ahead.
Yep.
All right.
Can I say something? I wanted to touch base on what Nancy and I participated in Nancy and Luciano's breakout room. And as I work with parents now, and also personally having my ex-husband incarcerated when my daughter was young, I was so shocked when you said about the phones being allowed to the families and having the families being able to communicate with their children while in, I thought that was huge. I remember my daughter being in kindergarten, I think, at that time, and my ex-husband was in federal prison. But just to hear that you guys are doing that for these families and having that ability for these kids who now have like even open house, student of the month activities, if having to be able to connect the families with these kids during those times is so crucial. So I give you guys so much kudos for doing that, because that really, I'm like shocked when you hit. I'm writing all your information down as you're writing in the chat room, because I'm definitely going to be reaching out to you, because we have such a high number of families that we work with now. And I've supervised 19 FACE staff members, which are family engagement. And we have so many families who are incarcerated. And to hear that model, to hear how we can collaborate closely with the system in engaging these families with their children, because we see it all the time when we ask them, when's the last time you seen your mom? Or when's the last time you see your grandmother? But I think that I just got to give you guys kudos for doing that. I mean, that you guys actually pay for the phone, for the 300. So I'm definitely going to be looking into your information that you shared, Nancy. I really appreciate that.
And one thing in terms of connecting, if you don't mind, connecting incarcerated parents with their kids and the way systems can help, and you were talking about educational systems, one thing that we have heard is including, if the child and if the community caregiver wants, is including the incarcerated parent in parent-teacher conferences. I mean, that's something that is really outside of the box for some, but when you think about it, I mean, sometimes that parent is the best motivator for that child. They could be struggling significantly with the effects of having a parent incarcerated, and that certainly comes out in the school performance, school behavior. But if they know they're connecting that teacher to that parent, that teacher is letting that parent know what's going on, that parent has the opportunity to say, no, Joey, I want to hear the next time you're doing a nice job. It gives that child an opportunity to make their parent proud. Depending on, I'm a firm advocate in training, if that teacher has been trained, and then now that child can also see that teacher maybe doesn't have a bias against their parents. Maybe it doesn't have to be a dark, ugly secret in the classroom. The stress that can alleviate for the child is immense. And so, yeah, there's so much that we could talk about, and I'm thinking we may need to have a follow-up event. But thank you so much for your question in the chat. It was very helpful and informative, and for sharing.
I see William has his hands up.
As I was saying, I am blind, so it's a challenge to navigate these systems. I would want to point out, I think about three things. One is Dr. W.B. Du Bois points out abolition democracy. And in my thinking, that means abolishing any kind of oppressive and repressive system. And these systems that we need to be abolishing start in our mind first. So to that end, as conscious human beings, and I love the word human beings that has surfaced during this conversation, we as conscious-minded human beings, we must begin to rethink how we talking and be careful to not perpetuate the system we here to abolish, and begin to recognize how easy it is for us to indict. And we indict with broad strokes. So that's just one comment. I am the founder of Reconstruction Incorporated. One of our domains is Fight for Lifers. And back in '93, we decided to challenge sentencing children to life sentence. And so from '93 to 2012, we finally got the Supreme Court of the United States to make it unconstitutional to sentence a child. The last point I would like to make is we've been so conditioned by religious authority, educational complex, that aging is not okay. We are so conditioned. Let me tell you, people, the most magnificent thing in this phenomenon is humans. And our ability to age is one of the most beautiful things that we need to begin to embrace, and embrace with zest. The last point is the facilitation of this dialogue is off the hook. Y'all did just a fabulous job. And I'm just really moved almost to tears with the unapologetic brilliance that I heard today. Thanks for allowing me to share.
Thank you, William. And I posted, which I hope is your site there, reconstructioninc.org, into the chat room so people can see that and go there and experience what you just talked about. And, you know, I think it's important that we put out these ideas and consider different perspectives. I will say one of the first programs that we did when I was here at Central was we brought Angela Davis talking about her book, Are Prisons Obsolete? And that was a very fascinating conversation about this conception of, you know, do we need prisons in the first place? And so I think I really appreciate your perspective, and thank you for joining. Does anybody else have any thoughts or want to reflect on what William said? Suzi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I like the hair, by the way.
Oh, thanks. It's my COVID due. So.
Hi, I'm Suzi Jensen. I work for a nonprofit in Hartford. We do several programs in some of the state prisons. I also grew up having a parent that was incarcerated in and out for the majority of my life. My question is mostly for Nancy, and going back to the teacher training. I just wondered how that connection was made between the school system and the prison system, because our programs are run in elementary schools and we do work with one high school. And we always go through the social worker so that there is a social work and mental health capacity to our programs. But it is so difficult to get everybody on board and the teachers allowing them to leave the classroom for the time for our programs. And also just providing the teachers with the training that this is something that's so important and helpful for the kids. I wonder how that connection was made through your program.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, the way that our program was designed, and the same person that designed the toolkit for Children of Prisoners Europe was a lady who is a guidance teacher, basically a school counselor in a high school, who was supporting 3 kids who were really, really struggling because their mom was serving a life sentence. And she just didn't know how to support them. And so she came to our organization and said, what can I do to support these kids? And she ended up going to visit the mom in prison and talking to her and trying to find ways of connecting the mom with her kids, because the kids needed that contact with her. And through her personal interest, she designed this entire training program for teachers, which she does as a twilight session so they can go after school. But it's a really popular session because they go into a prison, they get to see what that's like. It's they don't have to miss class time to go and do it, and it's hugely popular. So there are waiting lists all the time, and we're actually doing that as part of probationary new teacher training as well. So that we're training teachers before they even start, and it's sort of snowballed after that. So she already had the school connections and we had the prison connections, and we just had a lovely conversation and made it all work. Scotland is a very small place, I might add, so we've got a lot fewer barriers, I suppose, than you would have there. But it is something that just worked really, really well and has been going all guns really, really well for years now. So.
Thank you. I wrote down all the websites you listed. Is there more information about that part of the program on there?
Yeah, so if you look up, you just type in schools, for example, the different resources will come up.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Suzi and Nancy. And Nancy, Scotland is small, but Connecticut is, I think, even smaller. So we have a unified system. So our ability to change things is actually fairly unique in the country, and that's why we're hopeful about being able to make these changes. And I do want to give credit to Jacob Werblow, who's a professor and teacher ed here in Connecticut, and he routinely brings some of his teachers in training into prisons in Connecticut, because, as you know, in Connecticut, a lot of times, people want to believe that prisons don't really even exist, that once you have that sentence that, this is something that we shouldn't consider ourselves, and especially if you're not directly impacted by it. And a lot of the teachers that he's experiencing going into that don't have the slightest idea about that experience. So I want to thank him for that. I see, Timothy, you brought your screen on and you shared a YouTube video. Do you want to tell us what that is, or?
Hi, I'm not sure I shared a video. I think that was sent to me. I don't know, maybe I did the wrong thing there, but I'm just listening right now. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Anybody else have any final thoughts, any questions?
Just thanks very much for including us in this. It's been incredible to hear your conversation, and just great that you're exploring what happens elsewhere. I'm from California originally and came over to Europe because I was interested in learning more about how things work outside, and did a PhD in prisons in Sweden. So I can see why you're enthused and hope you can keep that up.
Thank you. And I see John is still on. Thank you, John. so much for sticking around and participating on this. Francine, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Just a sincere pleasure to be here and listening to all the valuable things you all say, and it feels good that we have we don't know each other from my perspective, but we all have many values in common and the same goal. So for me as a mere filmmaker, I think it's extremely valuable to hear all of this, and once again I'm humbled by your kind comments, and it's a sincere pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Francine, did you want to say something?
I want to say I thank everybody for coming. This is great for middle of the day. We had over 80 participants. Come on. So that was awesome for middle of the day on a 70-degree spring day in New England. I want to say also thank you for, we had some bumps with the discussion part of this, and we'll get better at it as we go along, because I'm hoping that the discussion part will be more a part of our One State, One Film, so that we can all get a chance to talk out what our feelings and how we feel. So I just appreciate everyone coming today and being here. It was really very great. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I will remind everybody that May 18th, 7 p.m. is our next event. You'll get that information because you registered for this one. We'll also send out a mass email. But I want to, on behalf of the collaborative, thank you. I want to give my brother and co-worker the last word on this. Daryl McGraw, participant in the breakout, always brings tremendous energy and insight, perspective, expertise, everything else to this. So I'd like to bring Daryl in and say some final thoughts, and then I guess we'll stick around for anybody that wants to continue on for a few minutes, but this will be the end of the formal part of it.
Thank you, bro. Thank you so much. Once again, like everybody said, man, we want to thank everybody that came. It is, a lot of times when I talk about the pebbles and the boulders, right? We talk about the boulders. The boulders are the big things that we can see. It's the pebbles that trip us up. And I think that moving forward, we have to identify these pebbles. Like, we talked about systemic racism being a super big boulder, but it's these pebbles, these little things that keep tripping us up. And we're talking about working with human beings and bringing back mothers and fathers back into the homes. I love the thing about the phone that Kathy talked about, thinking about these connections, that these pebbles that people think are pebbles, that connection to family, that when you can hear your kid on the phone, it shouldn't be something that's an astronomical cost. We should be working very hard to keep families together at any cost. At any cost, this should be a priority on our list. And through these dialogues and through these conversations, we tend to build up momentum, but we also build up conversations because we believe in the ripple effect, right? You throw a pebble in the water and it ripples out. So all the pebbles that we threw in the water today is going to ripple out. And hopefully you share this with your agencies, people that you work with, so we can keep building up the momentum that we make change. And, we do this is not a me thing, it's a we thing. And as you see, there's been plenty of, if nothing else, today you've seen there's been plenty of Black and brown and white all together talking about the same thing. So we can no longer believe the narrative that we are different. We are all as one, especially on this topic. So I appreciate you coming. Let's do the next thing. Let's go. Let's get it. Thank you, Everyday Democracy. Andrew, always, man. Shout out to Andrew, because this is the one person that said yes when many people said no. So I'm always, in the building, always willing to work with him. And thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate you being here. I guess with the remaining folks, well, before you're leaving, I would like to put in a plug. There's a Clean Slate press conference tomorrow at the Capitol. Starts, I believe, at 9:30 a.m. So if you're inclined,